Imagine walking through a forest, minding your own business, when something taller than a giraffe and heavier than a car strolls past you. And no, it's not a T-Rex sneaking out of Jurassic Park. It's a bird. A bird. One that could probably kick you across the room if it wanted. Welcome to a world where birds didn't just peck at seeds or awkwardly run in your backyard. They ruled the land, outgrowing elephants and turning every mammal within eyesight into a potential snack. In this episode, we're diving into a chapter of prehistory that sounds like a fever dream. Islands and continents dominated by giant, unstoppable birds. Some stalked the jungles of South America, terrorizing giant sloths and unsuspecting prey. Others, like the legendary elephant birds, lumbered across Madagascar, laying eggs so massive they make basketballs look like pebbles. Fossils and footprints left behind tell a story of evolution gone wild. Ecosystems ruled by wings and beaks instead of claws and teeth. By the end of this video, you'll never look at a chicken or your pet parrot the same way again. Stick around because the land where birds outgrew elephants isn't just history, it's a prehistoric crime scene. When we think of giant birds, most people picture ostriches or emus waddling awkwardly across African plains. Cute, sure, but nothing that could make a full-grown human break into a sprint. Now crank that image up to nightmare level, and you start to get an idea of the terror birds of South America, the Forus racidae. These weren't just birds, they were living skyscrapers, some reaching nearly 10 feet tall and tipping the scales at over 300 kilograms. That's heavier than some motorcycles. And they weren't slow-moving statues either. Fossilized leg bones suggest they could sprint at speeds up to 30 miles per hour. Imagine an ostrich with the stride of a greyhound and a beak designed to crush skulls. That's your everyday terror bird. Fossils give us a window into their absurd size. Take Kelenken guillermois, one of the largest known terror birds. Its skull alone measured over 2 feet long, with a beak that could pierce through bone like a hot knife through butter. Paleontologists have studied the articulation of the jaw and muscle attachments, showing that when it closed its beak, it wasn't just biting. It was delivering a precision strike, probably to the head or neck of unsuspecting prey. Footprints found in Argentina suggest these birds could leave tracks as large as dinner plates, each step potentially shaking smaller animals out of their hiding spots. And yes, they probably used that height advantage to peek over bushes like avian surveillance drones, spotting a giant sloth or juvenile camelid from dozens of meters away. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Madagascar was home to the elephant birds, like Epiornis maximus. Unlike the terror birds, these giants were herbivorous, lumbering about with the calm authority of a bulldozer. Standing up to 10 feet tall and weighing close to half a ton, they were literally bigger than many adult elephants in their range. Their eggs were a paleontologist's nightmare and a dessert chef's dream. One egg could hold over 2 gallons of yolk. Fossils show nesting grounds with dozens of these eggs, some cracked and some perfectly preserved, giving insight into their reproduction, growth, and even social behavior. You could imagine a group of these giants casually moving through the forest, each footstep compacting the soil, their shadows blotting out the sun, and every smaller creature adjusting its daily routine to avoid becoming breakfast. The evolution of these giants wasn't random. Islands and isolated continents often lack large mammalian predators, and South America, while home to large mammals, also allowed avian predators to take over ecological niches usually reserved for big cats or canids. Think of it like evolution throwing a curveball. Mammals were still around, sure, but birds got a shot at playing predator like no one expected. Islands exaggerated gigantism further. With fewer threats and plenty of resources, both herbivorous and carnivorous birds could grow to sizes that make even the largest land mammals look like children. And here's a fun thought experiment. Picture a Kelenken spotting a herd of juvenile megafauna. It doesn't have hands, claws, or teeth, just legs built for speed, talons for grip, and a beak designed like a medieval weapon. That's evolution at work. No tools, no armor, just pure, unadulterated biology pushing wings and bones to absurd extremes. Meanwhile, an Epiornis waddles past, completely oblivious to predators, likely crushing any small critters underfoot without even noticing. Two types of birds, both enormous, but with lifestyles as different as a hitman and a wandering giant. Fossils aren't just bones, they're stories frozen in stone. Each terror bird skeleton, each elephant bird egg tells us about size, strength, movement, and even personality. Because yes, these birds had personality. They dominated their habitats, shaped the forests, and left footprints that still whisper to us across millennia. And while you might be imagining a giant bird stomping around like a cartoon, the reality is far scarier. This was biology unhinged, a world where wings could be lethal weapons and eggs were literal boulders waiting to roll. If you ever wanted proof that nature occasionally wakes up and chooses violence, the terror birds are your exhibit A. These things weren't built to nibble leaves or politely steal crumbs. They were purpose-built predators, the kind that would make even modern lions reconsider their life choices. Fossil evidence from Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil shows leg bones thick as concrete pillars, designed for explosive speed and sudden directional changes. These birds weren't just fast in a straight line. Their hip joints and muscle attachment scars tell us they could pivot, lunge, and strike with terrifying efficiency. Basically, imagine a 10-foot-tall bird doing parkour. Evolution had zero chill. The real star of this prehistoric horror movie was the beak. The skulls of Kelenken guillermois and Andalgalornis stuuleti show massive hooked beaks reinforced with dense bone. Computer models of bite force suggest these birds couldn't chew, but they didn't need to. Their hunting strategy was probably more like run up, slam the beak into the prey's skull or neck, step back, repeat. Less gnaw on your leg, more one-hit KO. Fossilized mammal bones from the Miocene and Pliocene periods show puncture marks and fracture patterns that line up perfectly with terror bird beak shapes. In other words, we've got the prehistoric equivalent of CCTV footage, and it's not pretty. One particularly grim discovery involved the remains of a small, ungulate-like mammal found with a crushed skull and deep puncture wounds. Paleontologists compared the wound spacing to known terror bird beak measurements and found a near-perfect match. This wasn't a random accident or a rockfall. This was a bird deciding, very deliberately, to go for the face. And yes, that mammal probably never even saw it coming. Terror birds likely use their height to their advantage, looming over shrubs and low vegetation, then charging in like a feathery battering ram. You know how cats sometimes stare at their prey for way too long before pouncing? Picture that, but the cat is 10 feet tall and weighs as much as a small car. Then there's the prey lineup, which reads like a weird, extinct zoo brochure. Giant sloths, early horses, camel-like animals, and armadillos the size of compact cars all wandered the same landscapes. Some of these mammals had armor, thick hides, or sheer bulk as defenses. But against a beak that could puncture bone, even a tough exterior wasn't a guarantee. Healed bone injuries found on some fossils suggest not every attack was successful. Some animals got away, limping off with a punctured shoulder or fractured rib, probably traumatized for life, and telling their friends about the time a murder chicken tried to delete them. And it wasn't just South America playing host to avian chaos. In Australia, Dromornis sturtoni, sometimes called the thunderbird, reached nearly 3 meters tall and weighed around 500 kilograms. It probably wasn't a predator, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. Imagine a bird the size of a small SUV staring you down, calmly judging you for existing too close to its nest. Even herbivorous giant birds could be aggressive, especially when defending territory or chicks. Modern cassowaries, which are basically tiny, angry cousins of these giants, are already known for disemboweling humans with their claws. Scale that up by a factor of 10, and suddenly the phrase, "don't feed the wildlife," becomes a life-saving rule. The prehistoric crime scenes don't stop at bones. Footprints preserved in ancient mud show chase patterns, long, straight runs followed by sharp turns, suggesting active pursuit rather than ambush. Some trackways even show overlapping prints of birds and mammals, as if a predator-prey interaction was frozen mid-sprint. It's the closest thing we have to a slow-motion replay from 5 million years ago. And unlike Hollywood monsters, these birds didn't roar or growl. They just ran silently, maybe letting out a hiss or a low call right before impact. Not exactly fair, but evolution doesn't do fair. What makes all this even wilder is that these birds weren't anomalies. They were dominant predators for millions of years, holding their ground against mammalian carnivores like saber-toothed cats and giant bears. It wasn't until the Great American Biotic Interchange, when North and South America finally connected, that mammals started muscling in on their turf. Suddenly, terror birds had competition that hunted in packs, climbed trees, and didn't rely on a single, oversized face stabber. Nature introduced new DLC, and the birds couldn't keep up. So yeah, next time someone tells you birds are harmless, remind them that their ancestors were basically feathered assassins. These weren't flukes or evolutionary jokes. They were apex predators, perfectly adapted to their time, leaving behind a fossil record that reads like a cold case file full of crushed skulls, puncture wounds, and unanswered screams. By the time terror birds and elephant birds were strutting around, the planet was basically running on a completely different operating system. South America, Madagascar, and Australia weren't just weird corners of the map. They were experimental zones where evolution went off script and decided birds should run the place. And for millions of years, nobody told them no. These weren't side characters in their ecosystems, they were the main event. Everything else just worked around them, nervously. In South America, terror birds didn't just exist alongside mammals. They shaped how mammals lived, moved, and probably slept with one eye open. Giant sloths, early horses, and armored glyptodonts didn't evolve their bulk and defenses for fun. They were responding to predators that could run them down and crack their skulls with a single, well-aimed beak strike. When your neighborhood predator is a 10-foot-tall bird with anger issues, you don't evolve subtle camouflage. You evolve thick bones, armor plates, and a whole lot of muscle. Fossil assemblages from Miocene and Pliocene deposits show a consistent pattern. Big, slow herbivores coexisting with these birds, suggesting a long-running arms race where nobody ever really felt safe. And then there was Madagascar, where the elephant birds were basically the undisputed heavyweight champions of herbivory. Epiornis maximus and its relatives weren't predators, but they still dominated their environment just by existing. They were too big for anything to mess with, short of a very motivated human with a spear. Their diet likely included fruits, leaves, and tough vegetation that smaller animals couldn't process, which means they played a major role in shaping the island's forests. Some botanists even think certain large fruited trees in Madagascar evolved specifically to be dispersed by elephant birds. In other words, entire plant species were depending on these birds to eat their fruit and poop out the seeds somewhere else. When the birds vanished, the plants got stranded in evolutionary limbo. Imagine building your entire reproductive strategy around one giant flightless bird, only for it to go extinct. Nature does irony really well. Australia joined the Chaos Club with birds like Dromornis stertoni and Genyornis newtoni. These weren't sleek runners like terror birds. They were bulky, slow-moving tanks with massive beaks. Their skulls show powerful jaw muscles, but not the kind designed for killing. These were plant-munching machines, tearing through tough vegetation like biological lawnmowers. Yet their sheer size meant they still controlled territory. Anything smaller probably just stepped aside and let them pass. And if they didn't? Well, modern cassowaries already put people in the hospital. Scale that behavior up to a 500-kilogram bird, and suddenly the phrase alpha herbivore makes uncomfortable sense. For a long time, this system worked. Birds ruled niches normally occupied by big cats, wolves, and bears. They ran the show, and mammals mostly stayed in their lane. But then things started changing, and not in the birds' favor. Climate shifts during the late Pleistocene began altering vegetation patterns, shrinking forests, and messing with food supplies. That's bad news when you're a giant animal that needs a ridiculous amount of calories just to exist. But the real plot twist was humans. When humans arrived in places like Madagascar and Australia, the countdown clock started ticking. Elephant birds didn't stand a chance against organized hunters who could steal their eggs, burn their nesting grounds, and hunt adults with coordinated strategies. Fossil sites show cut marks on bones and burned eggshell fragments, which is basically a prehistoric receipt saying, yes, humans ate this. Those massive eggs that once fed growing chicks now fed human villages instead. One egg could reportedly feed an entire family. That's not a sustainable business model for the bird population. In South America, terror birds were already struggling with new mammalian predators after the land bridge to North America formed. Saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, and short-faced bears moved in and brought competition that hunted in packs and adapted faster. By the time humans showed up, the terror birds were likely already in decline. Add spear-wielding primates into the mix, and it was game over. Evolution had built these birds to dominate a very specific world. Once that world changed, their gigantism turned from an advantage into a liability. Big bodies mean slow reproduction, huge food demands, and zero flexibility when things go sideways. So the era of bird supremacy ended not with a dramatic asteroid or volcanic apocalypse, but with a slow, humiliating fade-out. Climate stress, ecosystem shifts, invasive competitors, and human interference stacked the deck against them. Today, all that's left are bones in museum drawers, cracked eggs in the dirt, and a fossil record that reads like a warning label for overspecialization. And here's the wild part. If things had gone slightly differently, we might still be sharing the planet with birds bigger than elephants. Your morning jog could involve accidentally locking eyes with a predator that doesn't blink and definitely doesn't care about personal space. Instead, we got pigeons and chickens. Evolution really downgraded the bird lineup. So yeah, there was a time when birds didn't just fly around minding their business, they ran the planet. Terror birds were out there cracking skulls like prehistoric hitmen. Elephant birds were bulldozing forests and laying eggs big enough to feed entire villages. And massive Australian birds were casually body-checking anything that stood in their way. These weren't evolutionary jokes or weird one-offs. They were apex animals, ecosystem engineers, and walking reminders that nature has absolutely no chill when it gets creative. What wiped them out wasn't some dramatic asteroid or a single cataclysmic event. It was a slow pileup of bad luck. Climate shifts, shrinking habitats, new mammalian predators, and humans showing up with spears, fire, and a very unhealthy interest in giant omelets. These birds were built to dominate a very specific world, and when that world changed, their size turned from a superpower into a liability. If you've ever underestimated birds, congratulations. Prehistory just humbled you. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these giant birds would you absolutely not want to meet in a dark forest? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you've ever had a close call with a modern bird, a goose, a cassowary, or an unreasonably aggressive chicken, tell us that story too. If you enjoyed this dive into ancient chaos, like the video, share it with someone who still thinks birds are harmless, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Seriously. Subscribing helps this channel grow, keeps these stories coming, and connects you directly to this prehistoric madness we're uncovering together. Stick with me, and I'll keep guiding you through the weirdest, most brutal chapters of Earth's history.